The dawn crept reluctantly across the snow-blanketed steppes of Ukraine in January 1943, casting long shadows from the skeletal trees that stood like sentinels along the eastern horizon. Lieutenant Colonel Viktor Petrov exhaled slowly, his breath forming a thick cloud of condensation in the bitter morning air. He stood motionless on the observation platform, overlooking the concealed proving grounds of Special Technical Battalion 17, a secret Soviet research facility tucked away in a remote valley 50 kilometers east of Kharkov. Below him, barely visible under massive camouflage nets and surrounded by artificial snowdrifts, sat what the engineers had codenamed Project Prizrak, the ghost tank. The T-34M-43 experimental model represented months of clandestine development, countless sleepless nights, and the lives of dozens of technical specialists who had perished during the Nazi bombing raid on the original facility near Moscow. Petrov's eyes narrowed as he thought about the significance of what lay beneath those nets. It wasn't merely a tank. It was perhaps the Soviet Union's most ambitious attempt to counter Germany's increasingly sophisticated night-fighting capabilities. A tank that could move undetected, striking like a phantom before melting back into the darkness. "Comrade Colonel, the State Commission representatives have arrived," announced Captain Sokolov, his aide, interrupting Petrov's thoughts. "They are waiting in the command bunker." Petrov nodded grimly. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes, and make sure the demonstration team is ready. We can't afford any mishaps today." As Sokolov hurried away, Petrov took one last look at the camouflaged shape below. The fate of Project Prizrak, and quite possibly his own, would be decided in the next few hours. The Soviet High Command had grown impatient with costly experimental programs that delivered no tangible results on the battlefield. With the Germans having been pushed back from Stalingrad, pressure to focus solely on mass-producing proven tank designs rather than pursuing technological innovations had intensified. Down in the command bunker, the atmosphere was thick with tension and cigarette smoke. 3 men in the olive uniform of Stavka representatives sat at a wooden table, reviewing technical documents and occasionally exchanging whispered comments. Marshal Voronin, the head of the commission, was a hard-faced man with steel-gray hair and eyes that revealed nothing. Beside him sat Professor Kurchatov, a brilliant physicist whose theories had provided the foundation for Project Prizrak's most innovative features. The third man was unknown to Petrov, but the blue tabs on his collar marked him as NKVD, State Security. "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel," Marshal Voronin said without rising, "we have reviewed your preliminary reports. Now we wish to see this ghost tank in action." Petrov saluted crisply. "Of course, Comrade Marshal. If you would follow me to the viewing station, we have prepared a comprehensive demonstration." The bitter cold stung their faces as they emerged from the bunker and made their way to a reinforced concrete observation post overlooking the testing area. Below them stretched a mock-up battlefield with simulated German defensive positions, including several deactivated Panzer III tanks captured during the fighting at Stalingrad. "Before we begin," Petrov explained, "I must outline the 3 key innovations that make Project Prizrak unique. First, we've incorporated a revolutionary camouflage system using a special paint that absorbs rather than reflects light across multiple wavelengths of the spectrum. Second, the exhaust system has been completely redesigned to diffuse and cool emissions, making thermal detection nearly impossible. And third, the infrared countermeasure system," Professor Kurchatov interrupted with unmasked enthusiasm. "This is perhaps the most significant advancement. Our intelligence reports indicate that the Germans have deployed tanks equipped with the FG-1250 infrared vision system. Our countermeasure creates a field that effectively blinds these devices." The NKVD officer spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly soft. "And you have verified these capabilities under actual combat conditions, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel?" Petrov hesitated. "Limited field tests have been conducted, but not against actual German night vision equipment," Marshal Voronin frowned. "So we have no definitive proof that this expensive project will work as intended in real battle conditions." "The theoretical principles are sound," Professor Kurchatov interjected defensively. "Our laboratory tests have—" "I did not ask about laboratory tests, Professor," Voronin cut him off sharply. "The motherland needs tanks that can fight and win now, not theoretical advantages that may or may not materialize." Petrov cleared his throat. "If I may, Comrade Marshal, the demonstration is ready to begin. I believe it will address your concerns more effectively than any technical discussion." With a curt nod from Voronin, Petrov picked up a field telephone and gave the order to commence. For several moments, nothing happened. The officials stared at the empty testing ground, the mock German positions sitting unthreatened in the morning light. "Is there a problem with your demonstration, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel?" the NKVD officer inquired, with a hint of amusement. A sudden explosion ripped through one of the captured panzers, sending a plume of black smoke into the crisp winter air. Before anyone could react, a second German tank erupted in flames. The officials stared in shock, seeing nothing that could have caused the destruction. "What you are witnessing, comrades," Petrov said with unmistakable pride, "is Project Prizrak in action. The tank has been operating on the testing ground since before your arrival. Its special camouflage system, combined with the sound-dampening modifications to the engine, make it virtually undetectable until it fires." As if on cue, the massive camouflage netting in the center of the proving ground suddenly collapsed, revealing the T-34M43 experimental model. Even without its special modifications, it was an impressive machine. Lower in profile than the standard T-34, with sloped armor and a specially designed turret. But what made it truly remarkable was its surface. Rather than the standard 4BO green paint of Soviet tanks, it was covered in an irregular pattern of shades that seemed to shift and blur before their eyes, making it difficult to focus on any particular part of the vehicle. The hull is coated with a special paint developed by Professor Kurchatov's team, Petrov explained. It contains compounds that absorb light rather than reflecting it, and the pattern disrupts the human eye's ability to distinguish its outline, especially at dawn, dusk, or night. Marshal Voronin's expression had changed from skepticism to guarded interest. "And you say it can counter German infrared detection systems?" "Yes, Comrade Marshal. If you would step this way to our technical station." Inside a small adjacent bunker, several engineers surrounded a table bearing what appeared to be German equipment. "This is a captured FG-1250 infrared system," Petrov explained, "similar to what the Germans are mounting on their Panther tanks. When activated, it emits infrared light invisible to the naked eye, but detectable through this scope." One of the engineers activated the system, and Voronin peered through the eyepiece. Through the green-tinted view, he could clearly see the testing ground, including the remaining mock German positions. But where the Soviet experimental tank should have been, there was only a strange, blurry distortion, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. "The special coating disrupts the infrared signatures," Professor Kurchatov explained excitedly, "and the exhaust baffling system prevents thermal detection. In essence, Comrade Marshal, we've created a tank that can fight at night, while remaining invisible to both conventional observation and the enemy's night vision technology." The officials returned to the observation post, where the demonstration continued with the tank executing complex maneuvers while maintaining its near invisibility under various lighting conditions. When it was over, even Marshal Voronin seemed impressed. "Your technical achievements are noteworthy," he admitted grudgingly, "but there remain practical questions. How difficult is this special coating to apply and maintain in field conditions? What is the production cost compared to a standard T-34? And most importantly, can these modifications be implemented without disrupting our current production schedules?" Before Petrov could respond, the distant wail of air raid sirens cut through the morning quiet. Seconds later, the hollow boom of anti-aircraft batteries echoed across the valley. "German reconnaissance aircraft," Captain Sokolov reported urgently, rushing into the bunker. "Possibly FW-189 Uhu observation planes. They may have spotted the testing facility." The NKVD officer's face darkened. "If they've identified this as a research installation, they'll return with bombers. The entire project could be compromised. We must evacuate the prototype immediately," Petrov declared. "We've prepared a contingency plan for this eventuality. Captain Sokolov will escort you to the emergency transport while we secure the prototype and essential documentation." As the officials were hurried away, Petrov descended to the testing ground, where his engineers were already preparing the experimental tank for transport. The chief engineer, Dmitry Gorbanov, a heavy-set man with perpetually oil-stained hands, approached with a worried expression. "The special cooling system is malfunctioning again, Comrade Colonel," he reported. "We can make it operational, but it will take at least 2 hours." Petrov glanced skyward, where the distant specks of German aircraft could be seen circling beyond the range of the anti-aircraft guns. "We don't have 2 hours. Disable the cooling system and prepare for immediate evacuation. Priority is to get the prototype out intact." "But Comrade Colonel, without the cooling system, the infrared countermeasures won't function properly. The tank will be visible to German infrared detectors. That's a risk we'll have to take. Better that than letting it fall into German hands." As the engineers scrambled to prepare the tank, Petrov reviewed the evacuation plan in his mind. They would move under cover of darkness that night, taking secondary roads to avoid German patrols and rendezvous with elements of the 5th Guards Tank Army 70 kilometers to the east. From there, the prototype would be transported to a new research facility in the Urals, far beyond the reach of German bombers. By dusk, everything was in place. The prototype had been loaded onto a specially designed transport vehicle disguised as a common agricultural truck. Essential technical documentation had been packed into waterproof containers, while less critical papers had been burned. The remaining equipment too large to transport would be destroyed with demolition charges once the evacuation was complete. As Petrov made his final inspection, Professor Kurchatov approached him, his face grave. "Colonel, there's something you should know. The State Commission, they've decided to cancel Project Prizrak, regardless of today's demonstration." Petrov stared at him in disbelief. "How do you know this?" "Marshal Voronin told me privately. The decision was made before they even arrived. The resources are to be redirected to mass-producing standard T-34s. They believe quantity will triumph over technological advantage." Petrov felt a cold weight settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the winter air. "Then, all of this, all our work, not necessarily lost," Kurchatov said quietly. "I've been authorized to continue theoretical research, but without the prototype. They want it dismantled, its components repurposed for conventional production." Petrov's mind raced. After all they had achieved, to simply abandon the project seemed unthinkable. The prototype had proven its effectiveness. In the hands of skilled crews, tanks like these could change the course of the night battles that were becoming increasingly common on the Eastern Front. "When are they expecting the prototype to be dismantled?" he asked carefully. "Upon arrival at the Urals facility, a technical team will document its components before disassembly." Petrov nodded slowly, a plan forming in his mind. "Thank you for telling me this, Professor. Please ensure you're ready to depart in 1 hour." As Kurchatov walked away, Captain Sokolov approached. "The evacuation convoy is prepared, Comrade Colonel. We await your orders." Petrov drew his captain aside, speaking in a low voice. "There's been a change of plans. You will lead the main convoy as scheduled, but the prototype will take an alternate route." Sokolov's eyes widened. "But, Comrade Colonel, the approved evacuation plan has been compromised," Petrov interrupted. "We have reason to believe German intelligence may be aware of our primary route. I'll personally oversee the prototype's transport along a secondary path. We'll rendezvous with the 5th Guards at the alternate location." Sokolov hesitated, clearly uncertain. "Should I inform Marshal Voronin of this change?" "The Marshal and his team have already departed for the rally point. I'll advise them when we've secured the prototype." Petrov clasped his aide's shoulder. "Trust me, Nikolai. This is the only way to ensure the prototype reaches safety." As darkness fell, the evacuation began. The main convoy departed first, following the designated route eastward. 30 minutes later, a much smaller group, consisting of the disguised transport carrying the prototype, a single escort vehicle, and a handful of Petrov's most trusted engineers, slipped away to the north. They traveled through the night, avoiding main roads and populated areas. The winter landscape was bathed in silvery moonlight that transformed the endless snow-covered plains into an otherworldly terrain. Occasionally, they would stop to allow the engineers to check the prototype and make adjustments to its concealment. By dawn, they had covered nearly 60 kilometers, entering a region of dense forests that offered better concealment from aerial observation. Petrov ordered a halt in a small clearing ringed by towering pines, their branches heavy with snow. As the exhausted men established a temporary camp, he climbed onto the transport to inspect the prototype. Even partially dismantled for transport, it remained an impressive achievement. He ran his hand over the special camouflage coating, remembering the countless experiments and failures that had preceded this successful formula. The tank represented not just a technological breakthrough, but the dedication and sacrifice of dozens of brilliant minds, many of whom had not lived to see their work completed. "What happens now, Comrade Colonel?" asked Gorbanov, who had climbed up beside him. Petrov didn't immediately answer. What he was considering went against his orders, against his duty as an officer of the Red Army. But sometimes he believed one's higher duty to the motherland might conflict with the immediate demands of the chain of command. "The State Commission has ordered Project Prizrak terminated," he said finally. "The prototype is to be dismantled upon arrival at the Urals facility." Gorbanov's face fell. "After everything we've achieved, but the demonstration, it was perfect. Politics, not performance, has determined the outcome," Petrov replied bitterly. "Marshal Voronin believes our resources are better spent producing more conventional tanks rather than developing advanced prototypes. So all our work was for nothing? Not if I can help it. Petrov lowered his voice, though there was no one nearby to overhear. I believe in this tank, Dmitry Ivanovich. I believe it could save countless Soviet lives and help turn the tide against the Germans' night operations. Understanding dawned on Gorbunov's face. You're not taking it to the Urals facility. Not directly, no. First, we're making a detour to see an old friend of mine, General Konev of the 5th Guards Tank Army. He has the authority to conduct field trials under combat conditions. If we can prove the prototype's effectiveness in actual battle, perhaps the State Commission will reconsider. Gorbunov's eyes widened. That's extremely risky, Comrade Colonel. If the state security discovers you've diverted the prototype, then I alone will bear the consequences, Petrov said firmly. You and the others will simply have been following the orders of your commanding officer. After a few hours' rest, they continued their journey northward. The weather began to deteriorate, with heavy snow reducing visibility and making progress increasingly difficult. By nightfall, they had been forced to stop 3 times to free the vehicles from snowdrifts. Petrov estimated they had covered less than 30 kilometers during the day. They made camp in the ruins of an abandoned collective farm. As his men worked to conceal the vehicles and establish sentry positions, Petrov attempted to make radio contact with the 5th Guards headquarters to inform them of the change in plans. But the heavy weather interference made communication impossible. Late that night, as Petrov studied his maps by the light of a shielded lantern, Sergeant Baranov, one of the sentries, burst into the farmhouse. Comrade Colonel, German patrol approaching from the west, mechanized infantry, at least a platoon strength. Petrov immediately ordered battle stations. They had only a dozen men, including the engineers who were not combat soldiers, against what might be 30 or more German troops with armored support. Prepare the prototype, he ordered Gorbunov. Can you make it operational? The engineer nodded grimly. The main armament and engines are functional. The special systems are partially disabled for transport, but the camouflage coating is intact. In the darkness, it should still be effective. Good. We'll use it to cover our withdrawal. Have it ready to move in 15 minutes. While the engineers worked frantically to prepare the prototype, Petrov organized his remaining men into defensive positions around the farm. They had only small arms and a few grenades, barely enough to slow down a determined German attack. Through his binoculars, Petrov could make out the approaching German force, 2 half-tracks and a light tank, probably a Panzer III, accompanied by infantry. They were moving cautiously, clearly aware they were in Soviet-held territory. He doubted they knew about the prototype. More likely, they were simply a reconnaissance patrol that had stumbled upon the Soviet position by chance. But that made them no less dangerous. Comrade Colonel, Gorbunov called from behind him. The prototype is operational, but only barely. The main gun has ammunition for perhaps 5 or 6 shots, and the engine may overheat if pushed too hard. It will have to be enough, Petrov replied. On my signal, you will withdraw with the transport and escort vehicle, taking the eastern forest path. The prototype and I will engage the Germans to cover your escape. But, Comrade Colonel, you can't operate the tank alone. I won't be alone. Captain Sokolov will join me. Petrov turned to his aide, who stood nearby. You were trained as a tank commander before being assigned to my staff, were you not, Captain? Sokolov straightened. Yes, Comrade Colonel. T-34s at Khalkhin Gol against the Japanese. Good. Tonight you'll return to your old role. As the German patrol approached the farm perimeter, Petrov put his plan into action. The transport and escort vehicle, carrying the engineers and essential documentation, slipped away to the east, while Petrov and Sokolov manned the prototype tank. Its special camouflage, even partially functional, rendered it nearly invisible in the darkness of the Ukrainian winter night. The prototype moved silently into position, its modified exhaust system keeping its thermal signature minimal. Through the specialized viewport, Petrov could see the German patrol clearly as they began to search the farm buildings. He waited until they had committed most of their forces to the search before giving the order to fire. The prototype's gun roared, sending its first shell directly into the lead German half-track, which erupted in flames. Before the stunned Germans could react, a second shot disabled their Panzer III. The night was suddenly transformed into chaos as German soldiers scrambled for cover, firing blindly into the darkness at an enemy they couldn't see. Adjust position, 30 meters right, Petrov ordered. Use the engine noise suppression system. Sokolov complied, skillfully maneuvering the tank to a new firing position while maintaining minimal noise. The prototype's special modifications allowed it to move with a fraction of the sound produced by a standard T-34. To the disoriented Germans, it must have seemed as if they were being attacked by a ghost. 3 more precisely aimed shots dispatched the remaining German vehicles. Then Petrov ordered a strategic withdrawal. They had bought enough time for the transport to escape, and there was no advantage in remaining to fight the surviving German infantry. As they retreated into the forest, however, disaster struck. The prototype's overtaxed engine began to fail, black smoke pouring from its exhaust vents as critical components overheated. They barely managed to reach the designated rendezvous point 5 kilometers east of the farm before the engine seized completely. "Can it be repaired?" Petrov asked as they inspected the damage by flashlight. Sokolov shook his head. "Not without specialized equipment and parts." The cooling system was already compromised during the hasty evacuation, and the stress of combat pushed it beyond recovery. Petrov stared at the disabled prototype, the culmination of so much work and sacrifice, now immobilized in the depths of a Ukrainian forest. The transport with the engineers should have been waiting at the rendezvous point, but there was no sign of them. Either they had been delayed or, more worryingly, intercepted by German forces. "We can't leave it for the Germans," Petrov said finally. "Prepare the demolition charges. We'll destroy the prototype and continue on foot." As Sokolov set the explosive charges around the prototype's critical components, Petrov retrieved the most sensitive technical documents from the tank's storage compartment. The core of Project Prizrak, its theoretical foundations and key technical innovations, could still be preserved, even if the prototype itself was lost. "Charges set, Comrade Colonel," Sokolov reported. "Timer is active. We have 5 minutes." They retreated to a safe distance, watching as the timer counted down. When the charges detonated, the prototype was engulfed in a ball of flame that momentarily turned night into day. Essential components were destroyed beyond recovery, ensuring that the Germans would gain nothing of value should they find the wreckage. For 3 days, Petrov and Sokolov moved eastward on foot, evading German patrols and battling the harsh winter conditions. Finally, they reached Soviet lines, where they were immediately taken into custody by NKVD officers. The official investigation that followed was brief but thorough. Petrov took full responsibility for diverting the prototype, explaining his actions as a desperate attempt to save the project from cancellation. To his surprise, the expected punishment never came. Instead, he found himself reassigned to a new research facility deep in the Ural Mountains, where work on advanced tank technology continued under greater secrecy than ever before. The transport carrying the engineers had indeed reached safety, and Project Prizrak's theoretical work would continue, albeit under a different codename and with modified objectives. The prototype, the invisible tank that had vanished in the Ukrainian forest before the Western Allies launched their D-Day invasion, became a footnote in Soviet military history, its existence known to only a handful of specialists. But its technological innovations lived on, incorporated into later Soviet tank designs, in ways that would not be fully recognized until decades after the war's end. As for Lieutenant Colonel Viktor Petrov, he never again commanded troops in combat. His war became one of blueprints and test facilities, of theoretical advances and practical compromises. But on cold winter nights, when the wind howled around the research compound in the Urals, he would sometimes remember that night in the Ukrainian forest, when for a brief moment the impossible had been achieved, and a ghost had turned the tide of battle. In the decades that followed, rumors occasionally surfaced among Western intelligence agencies about a Soviet stealth tank prototype developed during the war. But without concrete evidence, such stories were dismissed as fantasy, just another phantom from the mist-shrouded battlefields of the Eastern Front, where myth and reality often blurred into one indistinguishable whole. The winter of 1943 held many secrets beneath its blanket of snow. Some would eventually emerge into the light of historical scrutiny. Others, like Project Prizrak, would remain forever in shadow, known only to the dwindling few who had glimpsed the ghostly outline of a tank that wasn't there, moving silently through the darkness of the frozen front lines.